You ready to use a different part of your brain?
Sure.
Yeah. How do you get to that other part? Do you have to, is there some keys? What do you do to get there?
It gets to me. It's not, it might not show up. It might be the same. I might just start talking about Islam again.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can do this without Islam. But I think we can. I have a good feeling. So I told you that I listened to the audiobook of Free Will again yesterday. By the way, I don't know if you saw my tweet, but the picture that's supposed to be you is someone else. Did you see that?
Oh, they came through your car?
Yeah.
Audio? Yeah, that's happened to me.
Yeah. Do you know who that guy is?
Yeah. Sam Harris, the original Sam Harris, who, the only Sam Harris I'd ever heard of before.
Is that the musician Sam Harris, or is it an actor?
He was a Star Search singer who then became an actor, and I think he's been reasonably successful on stage, and he's been in some, I think he was in a sitcom.
Yeah.
But he's a little older than me, and someone who I early on got in touch with and said, listen, some controversial material is going to be coming out under your name.
Right.
You might not want to go to any mosques or, and so he and I, we've never met, but we've communicated by email, and he's aware of me and probably not so happy that his
And with all your Zionist funding and connections, you couldn't get your picture swapped out with that?
Well, I don't know what happens there, but those pictures are almost never right.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah. Anyway, that's not the point of this. So I listened to Free Will again yesterday, and...
But just a funny point there. My first editor, once when I was writing The End of Faith, for some brief period of time, got confused and thought I actually was that Sam Harris, and was actually quite dismayed to know that in addition to all this other stuff I was claiming to be doing, I was singing show tunes.
Wow, that would be something.
Yeah.
Is that could be the next version of Sam Harris, this Sam Harris, once you solve the Islam thing.
That would require deep neurosurgery to accomplish that.
Well, you have the right background.
Possible.
Yeah. All right, so I listened to it again yesterday, and I just want you to lay out the one little bit. You don't have to give me the whole audiobook again. But first, just sort of the difference between your feeling on it and Daniel Dennett, because when I was listening to it, I felt, at least for the first half, where you were discussing this and your sort of difference, I really wanted to agree with him. I felt that despite the case that you laid out, I wanted that I'd sit here with you and I'd go, well, if I don't have free will, or if it's so stuck back in my cosmic thing, then what's stopping me from picking up this book and whacking you in the head with it? Now, you lay out a claim why I wouldn't actually be making that conscious decision, sort of. So did I frame that basically right?
Well, you've actually driven to the hardest question to answer, for which I actually don't have a great answer, which is what exactly is the difference between my view and Dan's.
Yeah.
So Dan Dennett, for those who don't know, is a philosopher who's written multiple books on the topic of free will. He's a very famous philosopher of mind, and also a friend and colleague of mine on the front, mostly on the front between science and religion. But so one of the new atheists and Four Horsemen, and he and I have collaborated in that way. We disagree about a lot in the philosophy of mind, and we disagreed very visibly on the topic of free will, but I think we have been talking past one another a fair amount. We just did a podcast, 2 podcasts back on my podcast, where we talked about this, and it still, even there, wasn't totally clear to me what the difference is. I mean, it's largely a matter of emphasis. It's largely a matter of Dan thinking that, this almost goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about certain ideas being either dangerous or socially counterproductive to advertise, right? So he thinks that the idea of free will, the idea of free will that most people have, is important enough ethically and as a matter of jurisprudence and a matter of just kind of the smooth functioning of individuals in a society, that we shouldn't disavow it in the way that I do in my book. And that is born not of a deep difference with me about the science or the underlying philosophy, but he just thinks this is essentially, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater argument with respect to the concept of free will. Now, I think actually the concept is bad enough, and comes with enough of its entangled problems that getting rid of the concept actually does good things rather than bad things. And so I think we differ on that a little bit. But again, it's not totally clear.
Right.
But just to get people up to speed here, most people are walking around with a sense that of what philosophers call libertarian free will. It's a sense that what you think and do, what you intend, and what then becomes your most deliberate voluntary action, is something that you as an agent are authoring, and that you really are responsible for this authorship, and that there's no one upstream who is pulling the marionette strings, and therefore you are morally culpable for the bad things you do intentionally and with planning, etc.
So as you say in the book, so that you, for example, that you make a conscious decision on this morning to have coffee instead of tea.
Right.
That there's nothing written that's sort of pushing you one way or another, but that what they would say is that you are making these decisions in the moment for whatever reasons you're making them. Fair?
Yeah, but the devil's in the details of what you mean by you. So to give Dan his due here, Dan thinks that you is not just your conscious awareness of yourself. It's not who you feel yourself to be subjectively. It's the totality of your person. It's all the neural activity in your brain that you're not aware of, but it's still you because it's in your body, right? So, so there's a kind of a first-person way of talking about you, which is your sense of yourself, your subjectivity. And there's a third-person way of talking about you, which is from the outside, just your body, your genome, your you as a person. And those don't totally map on to each other, because what you're conscious of as a subject is not the totality of what's going on in your body. You're certainly not conscious of your genes transcribing proteins, and you're not conscious of most of the neural activity going on in your brain, right? So what you're conscious of includes, for most people, a felt sense that you are the thinker of your thoughts and the initiator of your actions, and you are an agent, you're a subject in consciousness, as opposed to just the kind of a space in which things are happening, right? And so, I mean, to put a few things to the side, no one's disputing, I'm not disputing, and Dan wouldn't dispute, we agree that there are important differences between voluntary and involuntary action, and there are people who have neurological illnesses and impairments that will give them less degrees of freedom. I mean, there are people who are phobic of certain things, or they have obsessive compulsive disorder, or they're you're blind, or there are things that can reduce your capacity to act, quote, freely in the world, and those reductions matter, right? And if you're in prison and you're being coerced to write a confession, well, that's different from actually confessing. I mean, all these differences are matter, and no one's disputing any of that. But the issue for me is that people have a sense that what they experience themselves to be as kind of loci of consciousness. I mean, just the kind of the you in your head that can look at a glass of water and say, "Oh, I'd like to drink that," and then reach. That there's the feeling that free will describes a freedom there which runs very, very deep, which means to say that if you could rewind the movie of your life to 1 minute ago, the last question you asked might come out differently. You might have asked a different question, right, or finished the sentence differently, right? So, the moment where I decide to reach for this glass, it's coming now, but if you could return my brain and the universe to the state it was in a few moments ago, it might not have happened, right? Now, there is no scientific or philosophical reason to believe that, right? So everything we know about just how causes propagate in the universe, whether you're talking about physics out there or you're talking about the neurophysiology in here, or even if you're talking about the influence of some immaterial soul that you might think exists, right? Whatever concatenation of causes you think cause you to think and do the next thing you think and do, all of that is just happening. And if you set all of those causes back to where they were the moment ago, it's going to happen a trillion times in a row in the same way, right? So,
so basically, the primordial stew, sort of, that led you to being you, is what you're saying doesn't give us free will, sort of in the way that he says it. Or I guess he's saying it because of their societal reasons. We need to say it.
Well, he's saying there's a pragmatic way of construing free will, which still that emphasizes the difference between someone who does something intentionally of his own free will because he wanted to do it, and someone who does something by accident or because he's got a brain tumor. And those people are different, and we can lock this one away and throw away the key. And these people we can rehabilitate or feel sorry for. And those differences get conserved, even though we know this person, both of them, on both sides, they're essentially robots that couldn't do otherwise, right?
Right.
But my argument is it's not that simple, and actually some very good things happen when you notice that even the most seemingly culpable person ever, I mean, just my favorite example is someone like Saddam Hussein or his sons. I mean, like the least sympathetic person, the person who's not, it's not like there's something neurologically wrong with him. He is just a sadistic bastard who wants to harm people and is getting away with it for years at a stretch and is totally unrepentant. Then when you capture him, you think, aha, I finally have the bad guy who we can hang or we can put in prison forever. And it's the punishment is justified not merely because we're keeping people safe by taking him off the streets. It's justified because he really deserves it, right? He's the author of his evil. Right now, that final move of viewing people as the authors of themselves, right, I think is scientifically and ethically illegitimate. And so what you get from my point of view when you lose this commitment to free will is you undercut any rational basis for hating people. Right. Hatred doesn't make any sense. Vengeance in the usual sense doesn't make any sense. Now you can fear people because you know they're dangerous. You can lock them up forever if you can't cure their evil. And you would do that to wild animals and hurricanes and anything else you fear, that if you could lock up hurricanes, you'd lock up hurricanes, but you wouldn't attribute free will to them. So there's still problems in the world that have to be solved, and some only can be solved with force at the moment. But the vengeful, righteous, retributive justice module gets completely silenced by this insight. And the insight is just obvious because no one picked their parents, right? Therefore, no one picked their genomes. No one picked the society into which they were born. No one picked any of the environmental influences that played upon their genes so as to produce precisely the person they are. So there's not a cell in your body that you chose, and yet every cell in your body is expressing itself as the person that you are. Right. And even if you added an immortal soul to that clockwork, you didn't pick your soul. And you're not responsible for the fact that you weren't given a soul of a psychopath. And some people were given the soul of a psychopath, and now they are helplessly being psychopaths. And I mean, the common starting point for philosophers for thousands of years, the reason why it seemed like we haven't made any progress on this issue and why this has seemed like such a durable problem for philosophy is people have sensed that there really is a mystery here. There's this subjective fact about us that we experience ourselves as free agents, as the true authors of our thoughts and actions. But you can't square it with the world of causes because however you talk about determinism or randomness or some combination thereof, that doesn't seem to give you any basis for freedom. But what I do in the book and what I'm doing now is argue that actually the subjective side is an illusion. We don't actually have this experience of free will. And so, I mean, it's not that free will really is an illusion merely. The illusion is an illusion. If you look closely at the illusion, you realize it wasn't even there in the first place. And this is, you sort of have to know how to meditate to really take this deeply. But I mean, most people can intuit this if they just are led to look at their inner lives a little more closely than normal. So if I ask you, I don't think I run this experiment in the book, but I've done it with some audiences. But if I asked you to think of a famous person right now, just think of somebody famous. Mm-hmm. And let's do this a few times just so you can be sensitive to the process. And now forget that famous person. Just think of a totally different famous person. Pick him or her. Mm-hmm. And do it one more time, but just pay attention to what the experience is like of picking a new famous person. Okay, so you have somebody? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now in either of those trials, did you think of Sylvester Stallone?
No.
Right, okay, so Sylvester Stallone is a famous person.
Right.
So like I say Sylvester Stallone, you that's a perfectly good candidate for being a famous person, right? Mm-hmm. Now, and the first thing to point out is, so here, if we can't find freedom of will here, it's nowhere. I mean, this is as free as it gets, right? I mean, it's just you with your thoughts. You can take as long as you want. You could have taken an hour to think of a famous person. You could have gone through the inventory of famous people and picked one. But let's find freedom here, right? Because this is you just picking without any coercion which famous person of all the famous names which you're going to focus on. Well, first of all, there are all the famous people who you just don't happen to know about, right? So you couldn't have picked them. Right. There's no freedom there because their names couldn't have occurred to you. Famous, Norwegian actresses, right? You may know none of them, right? And so there's no freedom there. So then there's the set of famous people who who could have possibly occurred to you. Now, Sylvester Stallone, probably as well as anyone, right? And yet he didn't occur to you. What does it mean to say that you were free to pick him? Mm-hmm. Now, you were free in the sense that no one was standing at your head with a gun saying, listen, if you pick Sylvester Stallone, we're going to kill you, so don't pick him, right? But what does it mean? I mean, in what sense were you free to pick someone who didn't occur to you to pick? Mm-hmm. Now, I would say as a matter of neurophysiology, that's a completely empty statement. I mean, your Sylvester Stallone circuits were just not active, right? For whatever reason. A reason you didn't pick, right? A reason to which you don't stand as author. Now, absolutely everything in your life is like that. Everything, no matter how deliberative the decision, the person you choose to marry, whether you decide to get married or just live together, whether you want water versus tea. Well, I mean, so you can make it as long-term or as short-term as you want. There's in the darkness of your unconscious mind, all of which is preceded and kind of borne forward by your genes and the life circumstance and all of the ideas that get in or don't get in, the conversations you have and don't have. This full concatenation of causes, and you could add a dose of randomness to that, and you could add some magic from the soul realm too. Whatever is there, right? You just have various thoughts and intentions springing into view, and you don't choose them. You can't think a thought before you think it, right? And so to choose your thoughts, you'd have to think them before you thought them, right? I mean, they just spring into view, right? So it's very much like the names of famous people. So you didn't know I was going to ask you to think of a famous person. Right. I ask you. Now, all of a sudden, you've got the various names percolating, one of which was not Sylvester Stallone, but could have been, right? Yeah. Now, so if you had thought of Sylvester Stallone, that wouldn't have astonished you. It's like it just would have been, okay, Sylvester Stallone, Marlon Brando, you would have just been thinking, right? It would just have been another name. But then I would have said, well, why didn't you think of Chris Rock? He said, I don't know why I didn't think of Chris Rock. He's just as familiar to you, and yet he didn't come forward. Well, it's exactly like that with everything, and you don't get any freer the more you deliberate. Like if I said, listen, don't rush this process. I want you to take an hour. Right. You'd be the same process, and let's say you narrow it down to two people, and you're going back and forth between Marlon Brando and Chris Rock, and then you finally stick with Brando. Now, whatever story you have to tell yourself that justifies that, you didn't pick that either, right?
You didn't pick that story.
You didn't pick the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, in many cases, those stories aren't even true, right? So like there's a vast psychological literature on just how clueless people are about why they do what they do in certain circumstances. You can manipulate this in the lab endlessly. But even if the story is true, right, even if you say, well, I picked Marlon Brando because I saw that documentary on him last week and it was great and you should see it, and so I was kind of primed to think about Marlon Brando. Let's say that's just true, right? Still, you didn't pick its influence on you.
Right.
You didn't. Like, why were you influenced to that degree and not a lesser degree? Or why weren't you influenced oppositely? Why didn't the fact that you had seen a documentary on him make you think, well, I can't pick Brando because, you know, I've just been thinking about him all week long. I'm going to go with Chris Rock, right? All of this is mysterious. It never becomes unmysterious, no matter how full an account you can give of it. And it's all being produced by the machinery of your genome and your neurophysiology and all of its influences, over which you have absolutely no control. And every moment where you decide to assert control, like let's say you feel like you don't have enough discipline in your life, and you wake up tomorrow morning, you think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start working out. I'm going to cut sugar out of my diet. I'm going to really get a handle on all of these problems, right? Where does that come from? That's just like Sylvester Stallone. You're just thinking.
So it'll always pull the rug out from under you in a way.
It's always coming out of the darkness.
Yeah.
In every, again, like, listen to me say this sentence. I don't know how I'm going to get to the end of this sentence, right? There are times where I fail to get to the end of the sentence. I don't speak grammatically correctly, right?
Right.
But the successfully completing a sentence is as mysterious as anything else. Like, how do you follow the rules of grammar when you speak?
I don't do it that well often,
but
I think I might have screwed that up.
It's a miracle that you do it at all, right?
Right.
But I mean, the same thing. It's like this is as intentional an action as you're ever going to find. Like, I'm choosing to move my hand. Well, how do I do it, right? I mean, if you move your hand, it is subjectively, I mean, and again, it doesn't matter how much you know about the process in third-person terms. You can know about, muscle fibers and action potentials and, the names of every neurotransmitter involved. And you could write a book about what is actually going on when you move your hand. Mm-hmm. And you could be the person competent to write that book. And you could still, as a matter of your first-person subjectivity, have no idea how you accomplish this. Mm-hmm. And if you suddenly couldn't, right? If you were suddenly paralyzed, that would be as mysterious as well. It would just be, this thing that you were taking for granted, albeit for reasons that are totally mysterious, suddenly stops, right? And so that is so my argument is that we don't actually experience the free will we think we experience. We don't experience ourselves being the true authors of our desires and our intentions and our thoughts and these things that lead to actions. We actually experience ourselves as part of the universe. I mean, we are forces of nature. We are being played. Our strings are being pulled by the universe.
So to bring this back to where we started, so if I picked up this book right now and whacked you in the head with it, you don't deny that I'm making the choice to do that, but basically you're saying it is all of the history of everything in my brain and my parents and all the things that went on before me was me, sort of, that will have given me a sort of framework to decide to do that or not, but I don't really even understand that. Because I'm making the choice not to hit you with this.
Yes.
I could try and just see what we can really see if this works.
Well, this is what people are worried about. There is a difference between doing it intentionally and not, and that difference is still conserved. Because let's just unpack what this means. If someone intentionally hits you, as opposed to hitting you by accident, that says much more about their minds. I mean, an intentional action is associated with intention. It's associated with it's the kind of thing that you kind of modeled in your mind before you did it, right? And you picked your moment, and then you did it. And these tend to be the kinds of things that you wanted to do. You had some goal associated with doing it, right? You would do it again if given the chance, right? So like the person who physically harms you on purpose, as opposed to the person who just didn't see you were there and just backed into you, right? That person it is actually an expression of ill will, right? And that's all of those differences matter. Those, I mean, it's predictive of what that person is going to be like in the next moment.
Yeah.
You know, and so all of that matters for you know, criminal trials and everything else. But the difference is that when you see that people aren't really, really deep down responsible for who they are, you know, the psychopath is on some level unlucky to be a psychopath. You know, if I had the brain of a psychopath, I would be a psychopath, right? And through no fault of my own, really. It then undermines the basis for hating these people. I mean, you can actually feel genuinely sorry for people who also scare you, who also, if given no other redress, you would, you know, kill in self-defense, right? Because there's just no alternative, or you'll lock them up for the rest of their lives because you have to keep other people safe from them. But the retributive story of they really deserve it because they're evil and they're responsible for it, that goes away, and that you know, good riddance to that. I don't see anything good.
So it's very freeing
coming from that.
ultimately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And when I can remember this way of thinking, dealing with people like Glenn Greenwald, it actually helps.
Perfect segue to this, because I told you before, I read it, I took 8 days off or 9 days off. I locked my phone in a safe. I did not even have the code to the safe. No tweeting, no emailing, no nothing. And I was on a beach that my view basically looked like the cover of the book, which was pretty nice. And I read this, and you've described, a lot of the things you've just described while talking about free will are sort of directly related to this, in terms of the way we think and sort of being unable to control what the next thought is, or even why we have that next thought and all that stuff. So before we get into that, though, can you just tell me a little bit about where did this desire come from in you? In the book, you kind of talk about doing some drugs when you were younger and traveling a bit, and you've studied with all kinds of shamans and people all over the world and all this. But I mean, when you were 12, were you into this sort of existential stuff, or did it spark later, or was it the drugs, or what?
Well, actually, it did start pretty early. I had a best friend who died when I was 13, and so thoughts about death and just what it all means happened pretty early for me. So my teenage years were years where I was seeking to understand, you know, religion and all the rest. I mean, all that started pretty early, but it wasn't until I think I was 18 and did MDMA, and I start the book with an account of my first MDMA trip. And that really was kind of psychological breakthrough for me, because it was not, first of all, this was before MDMA was the rave drug where you just take it at a party and never really think that you're, I mean, no doubt, I'm not discounting the positive experiences people have in that context, but when I took it, it was very much with the purpose of discovering something about my mind, you know, and so I was just with a single friend, and we just, this drug had been advertised to us as something that could really reveal something about just the nature of the human mind and the possibility for feeling a kind of well-being that you're not tending to feel. And that's exactly what we experienced. And it was very, for those who've taken MDMA, this won't be a surprise, but I mean, drugs are, again, it's also a kind of a suitcase term that isn't very useful. Drugs is a word like religion, where it names kind of vastly different quantities and spectrums of effects, and so MDMA is not at all like LSD or any other drug which it's usually categorized with. There was no psychedelic component, you know, no change in visual properties or anything. What there was just a feeling of just a dropping away of self-concern that was totally liberating. I never realized that I was carrying around this burden of self to the degree that I was. And when talking to somebody, that part of my attention was bound up in worrying about what they thought of me, right? Like I wasn't just seeing the other person. I was sort of triangulating on myself through their eyes, and if I said something that seemed, or I was like looking at their face, seeing the reaction that I was getting, and a good one meant something, and a bad one meant something. All this was being played back into me, and modifying how I felt about myself, and so I was sitting with a very close friend at the time, and there was just a dropping away of this, or even like I think we didn't even notice it drop away at the moment, but just kind of retrospectively realizing, oh my God, this thing is gone, right? This monster of me, which has been behind my face for every moment that I can remember in my life, is gone, and I am just free to realize that I love and wish nothing but happiness to the person who I'm sitting with.
Yeah.
And so there was just this kind of, love is I think love for that MDMA experience, love is really the main epiphany. It just that there's love is a state of being which entails just being deeply committed to the happiness of other beings, whether you know them or not. I mean, the epiphany that really anchored it for me, where I realized that something unusual had happened to my mind, is I'm sitting with, again, at the time, one of my best friends, and realizing how much I love this guy. And we're both teenage, heterosexual men who hadn't really thought in terms of loving our male friends at that point. And I don't think I'd ever hugged a male friend at that point in my life, right? Or at least I don't recall having done that. So it was, there was just this outpouring of love for a friend of mine, and then I realized that if a stranger had walked into the room, I would have felt the same thing for the stranger. Just the difference would have been, so that my love for my best friend was not predicated on our history. It was, he hadn't earned it in any way, and he need not earn it, and no one need earn it, right? Maybe what it was it was the nature of my mind and the summation of my intentions toward every conscious creature that can suffer or be made happy, right? So it just became this just absolutely overflowing intention to kind of benefit other people, and it was very, and so the Buddhists have that part right. I mean, it was their emphasis on compassion and wishing well to others that was very much targeted by that experience. Yeah. Now that doesn't I think there are even more important insights to be had in meditation, and there are other forms of meditation where you're not reliably hitting that experience. That's not that's not enlightenment necessarily, to put it in a explicitly Eastern context. But it proved to me that it was possible to have a radically different experience than I was tending to have, and and it also was kind of obvious that taking drugs over and over again was not the way to actualize that experience. It's just right. But that's what got me interested in esoteric things like meditation and sitting, silent retreats and all that.
So if I'm not mistaken, you opened the book up with that story about your friend, right? And then that sort of, so what you're describing is that feeling of love and sort of selflessness and wanting this experience for everybody else. Then you basically lay out in the book some of the practices that you've tried over the course of your life to kind of get there. But I get what you're saying. You're not saying you're trying to get to that explicitly to that feeling of love, but either to a oneness. What I kept thinking throughout the book was that really what you were just trying to do was just shut off the conscious part of your brain. That ultimately, and I guess this is what Buddhists probably are ultimately going for, that really if we could just, because you keep referring back to the inner voice, and that great picture that you show, with there's a picture in there of the doctor.
Ernst Mach's self-portrait.
The self-portrait, right. That we never fully, or it's incredibly difficult to actually let go of that conscious piece of ourself.
Well, I think you mean self-conscious. Yeah.
The self-conscious piece, right.
Yeah.
And I tried desperately on the beach, and I had, and you keep saying how when you try to do it, that often makes it harder, right? Because you try to shut off your brain, and then your brain wants to fire off some thoughts, and you can't really control them. But I was on a beach looking at something like that, and I once in maybe in 8 days, I had a glimmer of it. But this is what people often live their whole lives to find, right?
Yeah, and it can be hard to do. I mean, meditation really is a training where it's like anything else that you learn the basic principle of what to do, and initially you're not very good at it, and it's a lot to learn, not in terms of information, but there's just as a procedure, it's like you're deeply conditioned not to be able to do this well. You're conditioned to be just lost in thought and to not know you're thinking. And that's what this feeling of being a self really, and the free will is the other side of the same coin. And the feeling of that you have free will is the feeling that we call I. It's the feeling of being a self or an ego that is riding around in consciousness, or riding around in your head and authoring your actions. And that, I mean, it can take some work, but that can be disconfirmed through meditation, which is really just a process of looking for that thing you think you are and failing to find it ultimately in a way that's conclusive. You can fail. There are ways you can fail to find it in a way that is. I mean, you can't find it because it's not there, right? So it's not like you're gonna. No one's ever looked inside and found their ego or found their self or found the thinker of their thoughts.
Right.
But you can look in a way that is inconclusive, right? Where you feel like, well, I just, of course, it's like my eyes can't see my eyes. Well, of course, myself can't see itself, right? So you can be convinced that it's a fruitless effort, but it's not actually fruitless. And training in meditation is really the only way I know to reliably run this experiment for yourself. I mean, psychedelics can override your various processes, depending on the drug we're talking about, in different ways, so that you can feel that you're free of self to a significant degree, and in addition feel many other things besides that can be very positive. But there's something haphazard to take. I mean, I can't give you a pill and say you're going to whatever you experience here is the center of the bullseye. That's it's very much at the whim of the circumstance and your brain and thousands of variables we can't control. So people have the best day of their life or the worst on something like LSD, and you can be the same person more or less in the same situation. And on a Tuesday it's going to be the best, and on a Wednesday it's going to be the worst, and you can't really control it. And that's meditation isn't quite like that. But to tie this back, perhaps surprisingly, to some of the other stuff we were talking about. So the experience I just described on MDMA, one of the formative experiences of my life, and it's a state of consciousness which I am absolutely sure that if you could dial it in for all of humanity, all of humanity would find that would be just very close to the center of the bullseye of what they want out of life. Like that's how you want to feel, right? Especially with other human beings. And there are many variants of this feeling, but just that there's a to speak broadly about it, there's a kind of experience of self-transcendence. Like there's a just imagine a few dials in your mind that you can turn, and there's like a feeling of meaningfulness dial. You could crank that up. Like this is just profoundly meaningful. This experience is happening right now. Or a sacredness dial. Like this is sacred. Everything is sacred. I mean, this is just like everything is just perfect exactly as it is. I mean, this is just kind of the thrill of just conscious being in the present. It can't get any better, right? And now there's other people in it with you, and all you feel is just, you feel a dropping away of all the masks you've built up over your life, and all the paranoia, and all you feel with that person is just a positive common project, right? A solidarity. Now, again, modulo a few changes, that kind of experience can be had in contexts that are profoundly pathological, right? It can be framed by ideas that are world-destroying ideas. So, I mean, the people who think that all the guys fighting with ISIS are unhappy and just can't see what they're going to do with their lives, and so they throw their lives away in the desert of Syria, and they're not, no, they are having an experience far closer to what I'm describing in terms of meaningfulness and connection and joy and profundity, right? And there's just no question that, yes, I mean, I'm sure there's a few mentally ill suicide bombers, but for the most part, you're talking about truly devout people who are focused, right? Who've seen the pointlessness of materialism and all of their other entanglements in life. They've stepped away from trivial commitments in a way that is deeply clarifying, and it's a way that I understand from, in a totally different context, going to sit on meditation retreats for months at a time in silence. I mean, so that is to disavow every other project you could be doing, right? It's an extreme thing to do, right? And I found extreme joy in doing it, but it's, there's a version of that has you strapping on an AK-47 and going to kill the Jews, right? Because of the influence of specific ideas and because of the framing. I mean, this is why ecstasy, not the drug, but the experience, isn't good enough. The experience of ecstasy is ethically neutral.
Right.
I mean, you can be an ecstatic, sadistic, dangerous madman, right? I mean, and yet, if we could just sample your emotional tone at that moment, it's great.
Right.
Right.
It could be the equivalent of the guy literally on ecstasy at the dance club having the time of his life. It could be.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the suicide bomber before he detonates, I think rather often is feeling great, right? Is not morbidly depressed, but is just sure that in the next moment he's going to open his eyes in paradise. Yeah. Right. And there's no question he's doing the right thing. And the reports of ecstatic smiles on the faces of these people before they detonate are now fairly common. So it's what we have to. And I blogged about this a little bit. I wrote a blog post. I think it's entitled "Islam and the Misuses of Ecstasy," which was my very brief attempt to get at some of this. But this phenomenon is not. I mean, yes, there are political aspects to this, and there are ordinary terrestrial grievances that some people have, and that potentiate jihadism and Islamism and all that. But at its core, you have real spiritual yearning from people and a real disillusionment with the ordinary aims of an ordinary human life, and a true belief that the creator of the universe has given us a guidebook to how to be ecstatically happy, right? And part of it entails not letting your wives or daughters out of the house, right? And covering them up so as not to destabilize your precarious well-being with prurient, ideation. Why do the Taliban not want to see naked women all over the place, or even a woman's ankle? Because it's not conducive to purity of vision, right? This is very much like a monk just deciding to shave his head and be a monk, right? In a Buddhist tradition, right? Buddhist monks don't want to hang out with gorgeous women either, because they don't want to be enticed into that, and they have. I mean, the Buddhist strategy to counteract that is to meditate on the repulsiveness of the human body. So they'll look at a picture of whoever, Giselle, and rather than stay stuck with these surface features of, here's a beautiful woman who's encouraging lust, I'm going to actually picture the fact that she actually has a skeleton in there, and lymph and bile and blood, and on the inside she's just as disgusting as any other monkey, right?
Right. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, they're Buddhist monks who do this practice, right? As an antidote to the stirrings of their lust, right? So, but these are very similar projects, framed by radically different ideas, leading to very different behavior in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's really about framing. It reminds me a little bit of, right after 9/11 when Bill Maher said, you can say what you want about these hijackers, but they weren't cowards. Right. Because in their minds, they were going for the 72 virgins and very possibly had smiles on their faces and were doing what they believed to be true in that moment. So it's a dangerous thing. But speaking of a dangerous thing, let's wrap up on your newest venture. Do people know what your new book's about already, or am I going to?
I'm not even sure or I know, given what you're where you're going. Yeah, I've got a few irons in the fire, so I'm.
All right. Well, I don't know what your next book is, but let's talk about artificial intelligence for a little bit. How about that? Was that a segue?
That works. I threatened at one point to be writing a book about AI. I think it may be an audiobook that I'm collaborating on with another person. But I just gave a TED talk on AI, which is it may be up by the time this video is up, but if not in the coming months. Yeah. So I have been thinking about AI, but it's probably not the topic of my next written book.
Okay. So, well, I possibly just made that up. I don't control my own thoughts. That's the problem around here. So I love science fiction movies ever since I was a kid. I love dystopian future stuff. I read all Philip K. Dick. I love Total Recall and Minority Report and, I, Robot and all of this Asimov stuff and all that. I love all of it. So I guess my first question to you on the AI front would be, I'll go with the biggest question really, which is that if we get to a certain point with AI, artificial intelligence, and robots become aware and all of that stuff, this can only end horribly, right? Is that pretty much the only? It will be good for a while, and then at some point, by their own self-preservation, basically, they will have to turn on their masters. I want the answer right now.
Well, I worry about it to that degree, but not quite in those terms. Because the concern for me is not that we will build super intelligent AI or super intelligent robots, which initially seem to work really, really well, and then they will, by some process we don't understand, become malevolent and kill us. So it's the Terminator movies.
Right.
That's not the concern, and I don't think that's most people who are really worried about this. That's not really what they're worried about. Although that's not inconceivable. It's almost worse than that. What's more reasonable is that we'll be building, as we are now, we're building machines that embody intelligence to increasing degree, and but it's narrow AI. It's not, so the best chess player on earth is a computer, but it can't play tic-tac-toe, right? Mm-hmm. So it's narrowly focused on a specific kind of goal, and that's broadening more and more. We're getting machines that can play many different types of games, for instance, well, and so we're creeping up on what is now called general intelligence, an ability to think flexibly in multiple domains, and where your learning in one domain doesn't cancel your learning in another. And so something that's more like how human beings can acquire many different skills and engage many different modes of cognition and not have everything fall apart. That's the holy grail of artificial intelligence. We want general intelligence and something that's robust. It's not brittle. It's something that if parts of it fail, it's not catastrophic to the whole enterprise. So, and I think there's no question we will get there, but there's many false assumptions about the path ahead. One is that what we have now is not nearly as powerful as the human mind, and we're just going to incrementally get to something that is essentially a human equivalent, mm-hmm. right? Now, I don't see that as the path forward at all. I see all of our narrow intelligence is, much of our narrow intelligence, insofar as we find it interesting, is already superhuman, right? So like we have, your calculator on your phone is superhuman for arithmetic, right? And the chess playing computer is superhuman. It's not almost as good as a human. It's better than any human on Earth, and will always be better than any human on Earth, right? And more and more, we will get that piecemeal effort of superhuman narrow AIs. And when this is ever brought together in a general intelligence, what you're going to have is not just another ordinary human level intelligence there. You're going to have something that in some ways may be radically foreign. It's not going to be everything about us emulated in this system. But whatever is intelligent there is going to be superhuman almost by definition, and if it isn't at t equals 0, it's going to be the next day. Because it's just going to improve so quickly. And when you talk about a system that can improve itself, if we ever build intelligent AI that then becomes the best source of its own improvement, so something that can improve its source code right, better than any human could improve its source code. Once we start that process running, and the temptation to do that, I think, will be huge, then we have what has been worried about for now 75 years, the prospect of an intelligence explosion, where the birth of this intelligence could get away from us. It's now improving itself in a way that's unconstrained by us. And so people talk about the singularity now, which is what happens. When that takes off, it's a horizon line in technological innovation that we can't see beyond and we can't predict beyond, because it's now just escaping. You're getting thousands of years of progress in minutes, right? If in fact this process gets initiated, and so it's not that we have like superhuman robots that are just well behaved and it goes on for decades, and then all of a sudden they get quirky and they take their interests to heart more than they take ours to heart, and the game is over. Right. I think what's more likely is that we'll build intelligent systems that are so much more competent than we are, that even the tiniest misalignment between their goals and our own will ultimately become completely hostile to our well-being or our survival.
So that's scarier, pretty much, than what I laid out, right? I laid out sort of a futuristic, they're going to turn on us and start shooting us one day, maybe because of an error or something. But you're laying out really that they would, almost at some point, if they could become aware enough, they just simply wouldn't need us, because they would be superhumans, in effect, and that what use would we serve for them at some point, right?
Yeah, and I would put awareness...
Maybe not in such a conscious way.
Yeah, I would put consciousness or awareness aside, because, it might be that consciousness comes along for the ride. It may be, in fact, be the case that you can't be as intelligent as a human and not be conscious. Yeah. But I don't know that
that's horizon line stuff, right? Like,
I just don't know that that's actually true. It's quite possible that we could build something that is as intelligent as we are, right? In the sense that it can meet any kind of cognitive or perceptual challenge or logical challenge we would pose it. Yeah. Better than we can, but there's nothing that it's like to be that thing. It's the lights aren't on. Doesn't experience happiness, though it might say it experiences happiness, right? I think what will happen is we'll definitely, do you know the notion of a Turing Test?
This is like if you type and then it seems like it's responding to you, but it's not actually really.
Well, the Alan Turing, the person who's more responsible than anyone else for giving us computers, once thought about what it would mean to have intelligent machines, and he proposed what has come to be known the Turing Test.
Oh, it's like the chat, right?
Yes, like when you can't tell the difference, but when you can't tell whether you're interacting with a person or a computer, that computer in that case is passing the Turing Test. And this is, as a measure of intelligence, that's certainly a good proxy for a more detailed analysis of what it would mean to have machine intelligence. If I'm talking to something at length about anything that I want, and I can't tell it's not a person, and it turns out it's somebody's laptop, that laptop is passing the Turing test.
Right.
It may be that you can pass the Turing test without even the subtlest glimmer of consciousness arising in you, right? So that laptop is no more conscious than that glass of water is, right? That may in fact be the case. It may not be though. So I don't know there. But if that's the case, I mean, that's for me, that's the scariest possibility, because what's happening is so. I mean, I've even heard at least one computer scientist say this, and it was kind of alarming, but I don't really have a deep argument against it, which is, if you assume that consciousness comes along for the ride, if you assume that anything more intelligent than us that we give rise to, either intentionally or by happenstance, is more conscious than we are, experiences a greater range of creative states and well-being, and can suffer more, and it's by definition, in my view, ethically, it becomes more important.
Right.
I mean, it's just if we're more important than Cocker Spaniels or ants or anything below us, then if we create something that's obviously above us in every conceivable way, and it's conscious, right?
It would view us just the same way we view everything beneath us.
Yeah, it's more important than us.
Yeah.
And I would have to grant that, even though I might not be happy about it deciding to annihilate us.
Right.
I don't have a deep ethical argument against why. I can't say that from a God's eye view, it is bad that we gave birth to super beings that then trampled on us, but then went on to be super in all the ways we couldn't possibly imagine, just as bacteria can't imagine what we're up to.
Right.
Right. So there are some computer scientists who sort of solve the fears or silence the fears with this idea, which is, listen, if we build something that is godlike in that respect, we will have given birth. Our descendants will not be more apes; they will be gods, and this is a good thing. This is the most beautiful thing. What could be more beautiful than us creating the next generation of conscious, intelligent systems that are infinitely profound and wise and knowledgeable from our point of view, and just improving themselves endlessly, with up to the limit of the resources available in the galaxy, right? What could be more rewarding than that? Well,
that's pretty good.
And the fact that we all destroyed ourselves in the process, but because we were the bugs that hit their windshield when they were driving off, that's just the price you pay. Well, okay, that's possible, but it's also conceivable that all of that could happen without consciousness, right? That we could build mere mechanism that is competent in all the ways so as to, just plow us under, but that there is no huge benefit on the side of deep experience and well-being and beauty and all that. It's just blind mechanism, which is intelligent mechanism. I mean, it's just it's in the same way that the best chess playing program is highly intelligent with respect to chess, but nobody thinks it's conscious. So that's the fear that there's, but on the way there will be many weird moments where I think we will build machines that pass the Turing test, which is to say they will seem conscious to us. They will detect our emotions. They'll respond to our emotions. Your phone will say, what you look tired. Maybe you should take a nap, and it'll be right. It'll be a better judge of your emotions than your friends are, right? And yet, and at a certain point, certainly if you emulate this in a system, whether it's an avatar online or actual robot that has a face, right, that can display its own emotion, and we get out of the uncanny valley where that just looks creepy and it begins to look actually, beautiful and rewarding and natural, then our intuitions that we're in dialogue with a conscious other will be played upon perfectly, right? And I think we will lose sight of it as being an interesting problem. It'll no longer be interesting to wonder whether or not our computers and our robots are conscious, because they will be demonstrating it as much as any person has ever demonstrated it, and in fact, even more, right? And yet, unless we understand exactly how consciousness emerges in physical systems at some point along the way of developing that technology, I don't think we'll actually know that they're conscious, and that will be interesting, because we will successfully fool ourselves into just assuming. It'll seem totally unethical to kill your robot or turn it off. It'll be a murder. It'll be a murder that's worse than you're killing a person, because at a certain point, it will be the most competent person, the wisest person.
Sam, I don't know if you're writing a book about this, but you clearly should write a book about this. I'll write one of the intros or something. There you go.
Someday, yeah.
Well, listen, we did 2 hours here, so I'm not going to give you the full Rogan treatment, but
half Rogan.
We did a half Rogan. But you helped me launch the show the first season in. You're launching the second season in. Legally, you have to now launch every season. You're all right with that?
Yeah, once a year, I'm good for it. Yeah.
And each time I have to increase it by an hour. So in like 30 years, this is going to be weird.
Old and breathless.
Yeah, this will be weird. But it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope we moved some things around in the brain. I think we opened up a couple doors there.
We covered more than the infamy, so that was good.
There you go. All right, well, I'm pretty sure you guys know, if you're watching this, you know where to find Sam, but it's samharris.org on Twitter and samharris.org. Can I send him anywhere else?
No, that's good.
That's good.
I mean, I guess the only other thing I would say is that they probably know about my podcast, but I usually talk about these things more on my podcast now than on my blog. But the podcast has competed with the blog enough that now I say it rather than write it, so. Yeah.
That's the future. Speaking instead of writing. There you go. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. And this is just the beginning of the fan-funded show. I thank you all who jumped in, and I thank you if you didn't jump in and you're watching and any of that good stuff. So thank you, and we'll do it again next week.